What would you do if your HOA fined you $5,000 for using the lake you live on? I just wanted to take my pontoon out on the lake I lived on. Then the HOA hit me with a $5,000 fine, fake rules, and a secret club no one ever heard of. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became. They didn't even own the lake they were ruling over. And when I finally pushed back, the whole community watched them fall. The first time I saw Bethany Reed in that bright pink blazer, she looked like a highlighter someone had dropped on the edge of a postcard. Silver Ridge Lake was still half asleep that morning. The water lay flat and pale under a thin veil of mist, the air cool and smelling of wet pine. My little electric pontoon hummed as I drifted out from my cabin's narrow dock, coffee in one hand, rod in the other. After 30 years designing dams and water systems for other people, I'd finally bought myself one thing no committee controlled, a patch of quiet water. I cut the motor in the middle of the cove and let the boat drift. A loon called somewhere out toward the main channel. Farther off, the marina sat like a postcard. Rows of white hulls, polished rails, canvas covers. I took a sip of coffee, leaned back, and let my shoulders unclench. Then I heard heels on wood. The sound carried clearly over the water, sharp, hollow clacks racing down the community dock to my left. I turned and saw a streak of hot pink moving along the planks, sunlight bouncing off it like a flare. Bethany Reed, HOA president. She marched to the end of the dock, hand shading her eyes. The blazer looked like it belonged in a bank lobby, not on a lakeside pier. She spotted me and her mouth tightened. "Mr. Cole," her voice sliced across the cove. "Remy Cole, what exactly do you think you're doing out there?" I glanced around at the empty lake. No skiers, no kayaks, just a few cabins tucked into the pines. "Morning, Bethany," I called back. "I'm fishing." "You are operating a pontoon," she snapped, "during designated club hours." "Club hours?" I echoed. She sighed. "The Lake Elite Club, Mr. Cole. We've sent multiple notices. This lake is not a free-for-all. There are rules." I'd read those rules when I bought my place. Every clause about lawn height and mailbox color. Nothing about clubs. Nothing about designated hours. "I pay my dues like everyone else," I said. "Last I heard, residents are allowed to use the lake." "Residents who are members of the club." She smiled thinly. "We can't have just anyone cluttering up the view with—" She flicked her fingers toward my pontoon. "This." I looked down at my boat. Clean deck, quiet motor, a cooler, and a tackle box. No speakers, no beer cans. "It's 7 in the morning on a Tuesday," I said. "Who am I cluttering up the view for?" Her jaw twitched. "The bylaws are clear," she said. "Lake Elite Club members have priority access during designated hours. If you are not a member, you may not operate a pontoon in the main basin. I will not argue this with you from the dock." "I'll look at those bylaws again," I said. "If there's a line in there about me not sitting on my own boat on a Tuesday morning, I'll be sure to highlight it." Her eyes narrowed. "Don't test me on this, Mr. Cole. The HOA takes compliance very seriously, with—" that she spun on her heel, heels clacking back up the dock, pink blazer bright against the dark tree line. The sound faded. The loon called again. My pontoon rocked gently on the ripples she left behind. I sat for a moment, rod idle across my knees, thinking about the CC&Rs in a folder back at the cabin. Then a fish broke the surface near the bow, leaving a widening ring. The bylaws could wait an hour. By late morning, the lake had shifted from silver to blue. I steered the pontoon back to my dock, tied off, and climbed up the worn boards to the gravel drive. The row of community mailboxes stood by the road, all the same beige the HOA loved so much. My box held one envelope, thick cream paper, Silver Ridge Lakeside HOA logo stamped across the top. My stomach tightened. Official stationery rarely brought good news. I tore it open there at the mailbox. The letter inside was neat and formal, paragraphs marching down the page. My eyes went straight to the bolded line in the middle. Fine assessed, $5,000. For a second it didn't land. It just sat there, ink on paper. $5,000. More than the used pontoon motor had cost me. Enough to matter. I read the surrounding text. According to the HOA, I had operated an unauthorized pontoon during exclusive Lake Elite Club hours and failed to adhere to revised lake usage regulations. The violation cited Addendum L7, Section 3, like it was supposed to mean something to anyone other than their attorney. At the bottom was Bethany's looping signature. Beneath it, a tidy threat. Payment due within 30 days to avoid additional penalties and potential lien placement. They were talking about putting a lien on my cabin for sitting on my own boat. In water, I'd been told, in writing, was a shared amenity when I bought the place. The shock flushed hot, then hardened into anger. I carried the letter back down to the cabin and spread it on the picnic table on my deck. The boards were sun-bleached and rough under my palms. Out on the lake, sunlight glittered off small waves. My pontoon bobbed gently at the dock. I read the letter again, slower. On the last line, just above Bethany's signature, was a sentence I'd skimmed. For full context of this violation, please refer to attached new lake usage regulations, revised Addendum L7. I frowned and flipped the page. A second sheet was folded behind the first. This one felt different. The paper was thinner. The header read, Silver Ridge Lakeside, Revised Lake Rules and Elite Club Policy. The font was slightly off from the letterhead, like someone had tried to match it and almost succeeded. I scanned down. Exclusive pontoon hours, club priority access, non-member restrictions. Halfway down the page, my eyes snagged on a line that shouldn't have been there, or should have been written very differently if it were legitimate. The language was wrong. No dates of adoption, no recording information, no signatures except Bethany's printed name floating alone at the bottom, where there should have been more. I'd spent decades reading deeds, plats, covenants, and amendments. Real rules left a paper trail. This looked more like a wish list someone had typed up and stapled to the law. I leaned back, the paper crackling under my fingers, and stared out at the lake. How can they find me for using the lake I live on? I murmured, when they can't even be bothered to make their rules real? Whatever this was, it wasn't just about my pontoon anymore. And if Bethany wanted to play games with paper, she'd picked the wrong man to deal in documents. The breeze shifted across the water, carrying the faint smell of cedar from the cabin's upridge. My deck umbrella tapped lightly against its pole. Soft, nervous knocks, almost like the house itself could sense something was off. I folded the flimsy New Lake Rules sheet and held it up to the sunlight. The fiber was cheap, almost glossy, not the thick archival paper the HOA used for official amendments. The ink bled when I pressed my thumb along the margin. Faked, poorly. I went inside and dug my binder of CC&Rs out from the kitchen cabinet. The thing was 2 inches thick, printed on paper stiff enough to double as drywall. I flipped through the tabs until I reached the lake section, unchanged since 2008, clear as day. No elite club, no exclusive hours, no pontoon restrictions. The only rule was a noise limit after 10 p.m. I scanned the last 5 pages again, slowly this time. Amendments were listed with dates, board signatures, and county filing numbers. The most recent addition was a landscaping policy from 3 years ago. Nothing after. Nothing close to Addendum L7. My pulse ticked up, a slow metronome in my ears. I checked the HOA website next. There was a page titled Lake Elite Club, but it had been added recently. Just a single paragraph, buried between landscaping tips and a PDF about mailbox maintenance. No bylaw numbers, no adoption dates, No required board approval logs. The kind of page someone creates at 2 a.m. to make a lie feel 3% more real. I stepped back from my desk and rubbed the bridge of my nose. I'd seen this before, back when I worked for the state reviewing dam permits. Someone would try to sneak in an unfiled document and hope no one checked. 99% of the time, no one did. But I wasn't no one. If I was going to be fined $5,000, I wanted to know exactly who thought they had the authority. A knock sounded from my porch. I opened the door to find Marcus Hale, retired accountant, ball cap low against the sun. The man looked like he'd stepped straight out of a fishing catalog. Flannel shirt, vest with pockets for days, boots worn smooth at the heels. He lived 2 cabins down and took his morning walks like clockwork. "Something wrong, Remy?" he asked. "Saw you pacing like you were working out a calculus problem." I handed him the fine letter. He adjusted his glasses, read the first few lines, then let out a low whistle. $5,000? For what? Breathing near the lake too loud? I was sitting on my pontoon. Good Lord. He flipped to the second page. "Let me guess. This wasn't voted on. No record of any vote. No filing with the county." I checked. Marcus's eyebrows lifted. "Figured as much. Bethany's been trying to push this club nonsense for a year now." I leaned against the railing. "Club nonsense?" "Oh yeah." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "She tried to create something called the Lake Elite Club, wanted residents to pay extra for premium lake access. Half the board voted against it. The other half didn't want to get on her bad side. You know how that goes." My jaw tightened. "And she went ahead with it anyway?" "Looks like it." He tapped the letter against his palm. "She's been running the HOA like a personal fiefdom. The problem is, most folks don't have the energy to push back. They figure the lake rules are too confusing to argue. But I know a forged amendment when I see one. This," he lifted the flimsy rules page, "isn't worth the ink she used." I felt that cold, focusing clarity settle over me, the same feeling I used to get when a water rights case landed on my desk. A problem had an answer. You just had to follow the paper far enough. "What do you know about the marina?" I asked. "The docks, the boat ramp, all that." Marcus blinked. "Strangely enough, not much. The HOA uses it, but I've never seen a deed or lease that says it belongs to us. Rumor is old Silver Ridge Marina Company still holds the title, or what's left of it." "So it's not HOA property?" "Never heard anything that says it is." I looked past him toward the water. The sunset brushed the lake in amber. My pontoon floated in gentle rhythm against the dock, tugging at the rope. A fine for using the lake could only exist if the HOA owned the access to it. If they didn't, then this whole club evaporated like mist. "Thanks, Marcus," I said. "That helps more than you know." He nodded. "If you need anything else, you holler. Folks have been waiting a long time for someone to stand up to Bethany. Didn't think it'd be the new guy, but I'm not complaining." He disappeared down the gravel path, boots crunching softly. I went back inside and turned on the desk lamp. The CCNRs lay open beside the revised rules. The contrast between them was laughable. One official, one a sloppy imitation. I opened my laptop and pulled up the county deed database. The search bar blinked back at me. "Let's see who really owns your playground, Bethany," I muttered. I typed in the parcel number for the marina property, the one listed on the community welcome map. The screen took a moment to load, then populated with a company name I hadn't expected. Silver Ridge Marina Company, owner of record not the HOA, not recently updated, not dissolved. I scrolled further. The last transaction had been recorded almost 15 years ago, a lien release from a bank. No transfers since. No sell-off. No HOA acquisition. I sat back slowly. "So, the HOA doesn't own the marina," I said aloud. They don't own the dock. They don't own the boat ramp. And without those, they don't control lake access. I stared at the glowing screen as the pieces aligned. Quiet, deliberate, inevitable. The fine wasn't just wrong. It was impossible. I reached for the printed new rules again, running my thumb over the stapled corner. Whoever created this had bet on paperwork scaring people into compliance. But paperwork was my native language. My gaze drifted toward the window, where the lake shimmered under the late afternoon sun. The water looked almost metallic, smooth, deceptive, reflecting everything while hiding what lay beneath. Something was off in Silver Ridge, something bigger than a pink blazer and a bogus fine. And as the shadows lengthened across my deck, a thought landed with startling clarity. If the HOA never owned the marina, how exactly did they think they owned the lake? The realization hit like a cold splash, waking every part of me that had once sifted through water rights cases with a magnifying glass. Ownership wasn't a feeling, a tradition, or a habit. Ownership was a line on a deed, a signature, a record in a dusty file drawer somewhere in the county building. And all of a sudden, I needed to see that file drawer. I grabbed my keys, slid the fine letter into the inside pocket of my flannel, and stepped out onto the gravel drive. The sun was tilting low, brushing the ridge with gold. My old pickup stood under the pines, faded blue paint, bed full of sawdust and rope, exactly the kind of truck a man could trust on a day when things needed turning. The tires kicked gravel as I drove toward town. The pine-lined road curved along the lake's edge, giving me brief, glittering glimpses between the branches. The water looked peaceful. It always did. But peace was often the prettiest disguise. The county administrative building was nearly empty when I walked in. The cool air smelled like old books, dust, and fluorescent lights. A clerk with reading glasses perched halfway down her nose looked up as I approached. "Help you with something?" "I need parcel records for Silver Ridge Lake," I said. "All available historical ownership. Marina parcel too." She blinked. "That's a pretty big request for 5 in the afternoon." "I can stay late," I said, "or come back early. Just need access." Something in my tone must have convinced her I wasn't leaving without it. She nodded and motioned me toward a screen door. "Back room. 3rd cabinet on the left. Old stuff's all paper. No guarantees on neat handwriting." I pushed through a heavy metal door into a cramped archive room stacked with cabinets. The air was still and faintly musty, like time itself lived here, slow and stubborn. A single fluorescent bulb buzzed above me. Rows of manila folders filled the cabinets, labeled in fading pen. I found the Silver Ridge divider, opened the drawer, and pulled out the first folder. Plat maps, original subdivision plans, shoreline surveys, all the bones of a community beginning to grow. Then, finally, documents referencing the lake. The first surprise was immediate. The lake wasn't listed as Silver Ridge Lake in the original filings. Its legal name was Parcel Waterbody 14B, owned by a development entity called Silver Ridge Estates Development Group, a LLC dissolved decades ago. I flipped forward. Most assets of the dissolved LLC had been sold off in chunks when the development was finished. Road sections, utility easements, even the small park on the North Ridge. But nothing in the stack showed a transfer of the lakebed itself. No sale, no transfer to the HOA, not even a recorded easement beyond public access through specific shoreline points. The lakebed had simply never been redistributed. An unassigned parcel, a legal orphan. I sat down hard on a metal stool, the legs scraping the stone, concrete floor, and echoing off the filing cabinets. "Well, I'll be damned," I whispered. The HOA didn't own the marina. They didn't own the boat ramp. And they didn't own the lakebed. They'd been operating on assumption, loud, confident assumption, but assumption all the same. I kept flipping. 15 minutes later, I found a note in the margin of an old transfer sheet, barely readable pencil beside a crossed-out section. See also, inactive holding, Marina Company. A thread. A tiny, fragile thread. But in law, threads were everything. I dug deeper. Cross-referenced names. Checked expired business licenses. Eventually, buried in a dusty binder from the early 2000s, I found a document showing something unbelievable. The Marina Company, Silver Ridge Marina Company, held not only the shoreline access rights, but partial riparian rights, giving them legal influence over activities that took place on the lake's surface adjacent to their parcel. Not the HOA, not Bethany. The marina. The same marina Bethany was using freely. The same marina she fined me for being near. I rubbed a hand across my jaw, feeling a slow grin spread. Deep, involuntary, the kind that came when a puzzle piece clicked into place. They've been running a lake club on property they don't even own, I murmured. The fluorescent bulb flickered overhead, as if agreeing with me. I took pictures of everything. The plat maps, the notes, the old ledger pages, angling my phone to avoid glare from the ceiling light. I tucked the physical copies of public documents into a cardboard box labeled Reference Room Borrowables. As I carried the box toward the door, the clerk peeked in. "Find what you needed?" I exhaled, feeling the weight of the next chapter settling onto my shoulders. "More than I expected," I said. "A whole lot more." Outside, the sky had shifted to evening violet. Lake water glowed faintly under the sinking sun, a mirror reflecting back secrets it had kept for decades. I drove home slower than before, mind buzzing with possibilities. None of this was concrete yet. Nothing was decided. But for the first time since Bethany's fine landed in my mailbox, I felt the balance tilt in my direction. When I reached my cabin, the porch creaked as I stepped onto it. The lake stretched out before me, soft ripples, a few lights shimmering from distant cabins. My pontoon bumped lightly against the dock. I set the box of documents on the table, the cardboard thudding on the old wood. One thing was certain. The HOA had built their authority on sand, and the tide was coming in. But knowing something was wrong and proving it were two different things. If I wanted to confront the HOA with facts, I needed confirmation. Someone who knew the marina's messy history better than any fated deed could tell me. That meant finding the one name that kept emerging in the records. Jake Mercer, the listed owner of Silver Ridge Marina Company. I'd seen Jake only once or twice. Quiet guy in his 40s, worn ball cap, grease on his jeans, usually tinkering with an outboard engine behind the marina office. He ran the place alone, or as close to alone as anyone could run a patch of shoreline meant for 100 boats. The next morning broke cold and clear. Mist hovered low over the lake, drifting like smoke between the docks. I walked the gravel road toward the marina, the crunch of stones under my boots echoing in the stillness. The marina office sat perched at the end of the parking lot, a small wooden building with peeling paint and a single neon open sign flickering like it couldn't decide if it meant it. A low clatter came from behind the building. I followed the sound and found Jake kneeling beside an aluminum fishing boat propped on blocks. Tools lay scattered around him like metal petals. He glanced up, wiping a smear of oil from his cheek. "Morning," he said. His voice was tired gravel. "Something I can help you with?" "I hope so," I replied. "Name's Remy. I bought the cabin off East Shore Road last spring." He nodded once. "Heard about you. You're the engineer." I chuckled. "Retired, mostly. What brings you down here?" "Trying to figure out who actually owns this place," I said. "And the lake access." He paused mid-wipe. His eyes narrowed slightly. Not hostile, just wary, like a man who'd been asked too many loaded questions. "Why?" I pulled the folded fine letter from my pocket and handed it to him. He skimmed it, jaw tightening. They fined you for pontooning? 5,000. For sitting on your own boat? That's the gist. He blew out a long breath, stood, and leaned against the boat trailer. He looked past me toward the lake, where sunlight was just breaking across the surface, turning the water a brilliant pale blue. Figures, he muttered. Bethany's been trying to squeeze every dime out of anything wet around here. I've been reading the county records, I said. It doesn't look like the HOA owns the marina or the boat ramp. Jake scoffed. They don't, never have. Then why are they acting like they do? Because no one stopped them. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a ring of keys, and jingled them absently. Look, Remy, you want the truth? This marina's been bleeding for years. Taxes, repairs, lawsuits no one talks about. Most people assume it belongs to the HOA because it's easier that way. But it doesn't, I said. No. His eyes met mine, tired, honest, and edged with defeat. My dad bought it back in the 90s, tried to turn it into something. When he passed, I inherited it. The debt, the maintenance, all of it. The HOA uses the docks like it's their God-given right, holds events out here without permission. Not once have they paid a rental fee. That's illegal, I said plainly. Yeah, he replied. But most folks around here don't want trouble. They just want to fish, ski, enjoy the lake. Fighting the HOA? It costs money, time, nerves. People just shrug and hope Bethany doesn't notice them. And you? I asked. Why haven't you pushed back? He lifted his hat and scratched his head. Because I'm one bad month from losing this place. Bank's breathing on me. I'm behind on taxes. HOA might be a nightmare, but bankruptcy is worse. I nodded slowly. It all fit. A pressured owner, a quiet property line, a bully running unchecked. It was the perfect storm for someone like Bethany to seize control without ever filing a single legal document. Jake looked down at his hands, grease shining in the morning light. Truth is, he added, voice quieter now, I've been thinking about selling, maybe letting it all go. To the HOA? I asked. He barked a humorless laugh. They offered once, insulting price, strings everywhere. Made it clear they wanted control, not partnership. Then who? I pressed. He hesitated. The lake lapped softly against the breakwater. A gull cried overhead. When he finally spoke, his tone had changed. Lighter, almost relieved, like he'd been waiting to say it out loud. You ever think about owning more than just your cabin, Remy? He asked. Because if you wanted to, you strike me as the kind of guy who'd actually do something with this place. Treat it right. Keep the vultures off it. I blinked, caught off guard. Are you asking if I want to buy the marina? I'm asking if you're willing to consider it. He looked at me with a tired kind of hope. The whole thing. Dock lines, ramp, shoreline rights. Everything the HOA's been pretending belongs to them. A breeze stirred across the water, cold enough to raise goosebumps on my arms. That wind carried something else, too. Possibility. The shape of a plan I hadn't let myself imagine until now. Jake, I said slowly, if I bought this, what would it mean for you? For the lake? For the HOA? He shrugged. For me, it means I get out clean. For the lake? Maybe someone finally fights back. And for the HOA? He cracked the faintest smile. It means Bethany Reed's crown would slide right off her head. I looked past him at the marina, the sun glinting off metal cleats, the weathered planks, the quiet dignity of a place that had been used, neglected, and taken for granted. Owning the marina would give me leverage, real leverage, not the imagined power the HOA had scrawled into fake amendments, and it would put a crack right at the foundation of everything Bethany had built her authority on. A fine for pontooning was one thing. A man owning the docks that gave access to the lake was another. "Jake," I said finally, "I want to see the numbers. If it's feasible, we'll talk." He nodded once, firm, grateful, almost relieved. "I'll get the paperwork," he said. "And Remy, if you do this, you won't just be buying a marina." "What would I be buying?" "A way out," he said. "For all of us." As I walked back up the gravel path, the lake gleaming behind me, the pieces began to rearrange themselves in a way I'd never expected. Bethany had weaponized paper, but paper went both ways, and for the first time since her pink blazer appeared on that dock, I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger, not irritation, but a slow burning resolve. If the HOA thought they owned the lake, maybe it was time to show them otherwise. The next morning, I woke to the soft rumble of thunder rolling over the ridge. A storm was building, thin fingers of wind sweeping across the water, brushing the pine tops, rattling the aluminum ladder on my dock. The storm felt fitting, like the lake itself understood decisions were being made. Inside, my coffee steamed on the table beside Jake's preliminary documents. Numbers scrawled in pen. Debt columns that didn't quite line up. A marina worth saving, but held together by duct tape and memory. I dialed Marcus Hale. He picked up on the second ring. "Morning, Remy. You sound like a man chewing on something important." "I need your help," I said. "Legal help." "That sounds worse. I'm on my porch. Bring your boots. The ground's soaked." His cabin sat 2 doors down, halfway hidden behind a thicket of cedar trees. When I walked up, he was sitting in an old rocking chair, coffee in hand, wearing the same faded vest he always wore when talking about serious matters. I handed him the folder. He skimmed it, brow furrowing deeper with every minute. The rain picked up, tapping the porch roof like impatient fingers. "Well," he said finally, "Jake wasn't kidding. The marina's in rough shape, but he still holds clear title. Boat ramp, shoreline rights, dock lines, all his, which means the HOA has exactly zero authority over any of it." He looked up at me over his glasses. "You thinking of buying it?" "I'm thinking," I said slowly, "that if I own the only legal lake access points, the HOA's fake rules fall apart." Marcus leaned back, rocking once. "It'd change everything, but the HOA won't like it. They think they're running a lake empire." I smirked. "Then let's remind them empires fall." Thunder rolled again, closer now. Marcus tapped the deed page. "If you want to move, do it quietly. Don't give Bethany time to stir the board. We'll need an LLC, one that doesn't scream, 'Remy wants revenge.' Something bland." "Cole Waterfront LLC?" I offered. "Perfect. Sounds like a company that sells overpriced kayak rentals." He stood, joints popping. "You bring Jake the offer. I'll draft the purchase agreement. But Remy, once you start this, you're in a whole different game." "I know. And the HOA? They'll fight dirty." "I know that too." Lightning flashed across the lake, bright and white and sharp. "Good," he said. "Then let's get to work." By noon, the storm had passed, leaving the air warm and heavy. I met Jake in the marina office. Rain dripped from the eaves, creating small rings in puddles beside the boat ramp. "You serious about this?" he asked, arms crossed. Not defensive, hopeful, but guarded. "Yes," I said. "I want to buy the marina. All of it." He swallowed hard. "You'd be taking on debt, repairs, taxes, and Bethany, she'll try everything once she figures out what you're doing." "I'm aware. And you're still in?" I nodded. "I didn't come this far to let a forged rule and a pink blazer bully the whole community." He laughed, a dry, startled bark like he hadn't expected humor today. Then he shook my hand. It was a tired handshake, but firm. The handshake of a man unloading a burden he'd carried too long. We signed the initial agreements right there on the counter, between a jar of lost and found keys and a stack of outdated marina maps. The air smelled of lake water and outboard grease. Honest smells, unpolished but real. "I'll get you the full paperwork by tomorrow," Jake said. "Marcus will need to review it." "I'll be ready." As I left, I looked back at the marina, the long wooden dock stretching into the brightening afternoon, yachts and small boats bobbing gently, reflections gliding across the water like they'd been painted on. It was strange. I'd moved to Silver Ridge for quiet mornings on the pontoon, for peace, not power. But there was a difference between wanting peace and letting someone steal it from you. That afternoon, I drafted a letter. It was polite, measured, almost friendly. "Payment enclosed," I wrote, "under protest while legitimacy of rule is reviewed." I included the $5,000 check. Most people would never willingly pay a fine that enraged them. But I had a strategy. Paying under protest created a paper trail, proof that I complied while disputing the authority. It made me look cooperative, reasonable, not someone planning a takeover, and it lulled Bethany into thinking she'd already won. I mailed the envelope at the small post office near town. The clerk slid it into the outgoing slot while a red digital clock ticked overhead. It felt like dropping bait into water. On my way home, I passed the community center. Through the window, I saw Bethany in her unmistakable pink blazer talking animatedly with two board members. Laughter, self-satisfied smiles. I rolled my window down. Their voices carried faintly through the summer air. "See?" Bethany said, waving a paper. "Mr. Cole finally paid. People just need to understand who's in charge." My grip tightened on the steering wheel. Not in anger, just certainty. She had no idea who was actually in charge now. That evening, I sat on my deck as the sun dipped behind the ridge. The air smelled of wet earth and pine sap. A lone fishing boat drifted across the far cove, its motor barely audible. My pontoon rocked softly in its slip, the rope creaking in rhythm with the water. I opened the folder from Marcus one more time. The LLC paperwork was ready for signatures. The purchase agreement was nearly complete. All it needed was Jake's final numbers, and the marina would be mine. A dragonfly skimmed across the lake, wings catching the last shimmering light. I exhaled slowly. This wasn't vengeance. This was correction, protection, justice. The HOA had built their kingdom on assumptions and intimidation, but property law didn't care about pink blazers or fake amendments. It cared about deeds. And soon, I'd have the one deed they couldn't ignore. The following week unfolded like the slow tightening of a rope, quiet on the surface, tension coiling beneath. Each day felt too calm, like the lake was holding its breath alongside me. The mornings were hot and bright, dragonflies skimming the glassy water, the air thick with that humid sweetness pine forests release after rainfall. But the calm wasn't real. It was a pause, a silence before something larger. Jake and I signed the final purchase documents 2 days later, in Marcus's tin-roofed office overlooking the ridge. The building creaked every time the breeze pushed against it. A jar of peppermints sat next to the legal printer, and the room smelled faintly of old books and cedar oil. Marcus slid the last deed across the desk. "Congratulations," he said. "Cole Waterfront LLC now owns the marina, the entire dock line, and the primary boat ramp, including shoreline rights." Jake exhaled like someone had loosened a strap around his chest. "Take care of her," he murmured. "My dad always said this place deserved better than it got." "I will," I promised, and I meant it. When Jake left, Marcus leaned back and eyed me with the steady look of a man who'd seen too many disputes and too many people underestimate the power of documentation. "You know this puts the HOA in a box," he said, "a small one." "They'll fight," I replied. "They'll try, but you own the gate to their kingdom." I carried the newly recorded deed back to my cabin in a waterproof envelope, even though the sky was clear. It felt symbolic, protecting the paper that would remake the lake. That evening, I installed the sign. A metal post, heavy, black powder-coated steel, anchored deep into the shoreline gravel beside the dock. The sign itself gleamed under the late sunlight. Private Marina Coal Waterfront LLC Trespassing. Fine. Up to $1,000. Some might call it dramatic. But drama was the only language Bethany understood. The next morning, word spread fast, faster than a pontoon at full throttle. People slowed their golf carts as they passed my shoreline. Neighbors whispered at the community mailboxes. A few even stopped by, pretending to admire the view while sneaking glances at the sign. By noon, Bethany had noticed. I saw her across the lake, standing stiff as a fence post on the HOA-maintained boardwalk, phone pressed to her ear, pink blazer glowing like a warning flare. Even from a distance, I recognized the agitated hand gestures, the universal language of a woman who believed everything within eyesight was her jurisdiction. But she didn't come storming over. Not yet. They had no idea the marina had changed hands. They had no idea the docks they'd been using, throwing their private club parties on, blocking residents from, no longer belonged to a man too tired to fight. For now, they pretended nothing had changed, and I pretended to believe them. The HOA's activities continued as if the sign didn't exist. On Wednesday, the Lake Elite Club held a members' sunset social on the marina deck. 30 people, a Bluetooth speaker, 3 coolers, and not a single permission request. I watched from my porch, camera lens resting on the deck rail, recording every minute. The blue dusk light softened the scene, but not enough to hide the smug tilt of Bethany's chin as she clinked glasses with her inner circle. The following Saturday morning, a pontoon parade practiced its route. HOA board members milled around my shoreline like they owned the place, adjusting banners, handing out radios, directing boats as if choreographing a Broadway show. I filmed it all. Not to embarrass them. Not yet. To establish a timeline. Every appearance. Every unauthorized use. Every smiling wave as they stood, unknowingly, on my property. Sheriff Sarah stopped by that afternoon, responding to my earlier call. Her patrol SUV rolled down my gravel drive, tires cracking twigs as it came to a halt. She stepped out, uniform crisp, hair pulled back into a tight braid. "Heard you finalized the purchase," she said with a half smile. "That'll shake up the hornet's nest. Just trying to bring things back to what's legal." She walked with me to the dock, eyeing the new sign. "This is enforceable," she said, tapping the metal post. "If they're ignoring notice and documented ownership, I can support you when the time comes. But Remy, be patient. Timing matters." "I know," I said. "I'm not going to jump too soon." She looked out at the water, where the last of the pontoon parade was returning to shore, their music echoing faintly across the lake. "They're bold," she said. "Bolder than most HOAs I've dealt with." "Boldness doesn't make property lines move," she chuckled. "No, but it makes people forget where they were drawn in the first place." When she left, the lake slipped into a quiet lull. Wind rippled across the surface, carrying the scent of sunscreen and gasoline from the parade boats. Kids splashed somewhere downshore. A screen door slammed near the cabins on Cedar Bend. All normal lake sounds. But under them, a hum of something shifting. A storm that hadn't broken yet, but would. That night, I laid out every piece of evidence on my table. Deed copies, photos, videos, screenshots of HOA event announcements using my marina without consent. My porch light buzzed overhead, drawing moths that flickered in and out of the glow. This wasn't just about proving ownership. It was about halting the slow creep of an HOA that had taken 1 inch too many. It was about setting things right for every resident, too tired or too intimidated to push back. This was the quiet before the storm. And storms, real ones, never stayed quiet long. The next morning rose warm and windless, the kind of early fall day that made the entire lake look like polished turquoise glass. Colorful kayaks dotted the water. A pair of fishermen cast lines near the opposite shore. And in the distance, unmistakable even from my porch, a cluster of HOA board members gathered near the marina parking lot. The parade day had arrived. The Sunset Yacht and Pontoon Parade wasn't just their biggest event of the year. It was Bethany's crown jewel, the moment she paraded herself and her Lake Elite Club across the water like conquering royalty. Banners, champagne, sequins, speakers blasting soft rock. She loved the spectacle. And this year, she'd planned it all on property she didn't own. I watched from my porch as boat after boat idled into formation, engines rumbling low, the sun glinting off chrome rails, brightly painted pontoons, gleaming yachts, kayaks and paddleboards braided in between like colorful stitches. And at the center of it all, anchoring the chaos, was Bethany. Her pontoon was bigger than the others, decked out in orange and gold decorations for the fall theme. Ropes of fake leaves wrapped the railings. A giant banner read, "Lake Elite Club, Members Only Parade." Bethany herself stood at the helm, wearing an explosion of a sweater. Orange sequins, brown trim, something that looked suspiciously like glittered acorns. Her bright pink blazer was draped over a chair beside her, ready for the victory lap she assumed she would take. She raised a handheld radio and barked orders to the boats behind her. They shifted obediently. I couldn't help but smile. From my deck, I picked up my binoculars. Sheriff Sarah's cruiser rolled into the community lot just as she promised, not to intervene but to observe. She stepped out, leaning casually against her SUV, expression neutral, but eyes alert. Marcus parked his dusty sedan near the marina office. He walked to the end of the dock, hands in his pockets, gaze steady on the parade. And then, a minute past 2 o'clock, my process server arrived. He wore a crisp button-down shirt, dark slacks, and sunglasses. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet professional carrying a leather briefcase full of legal thunder. He walked past the crowd gathered at the shoreline, ignoring their curious glances, and stopped beside me at the end of the dock. "You ready, Mr. Cole?" "More than ready," I said. He nodded once. "Then give me the signal." I waited until Bethany's pontoon glided past the marina entrance, her flotilla of 30 boats trailing behind her like a royal procession. Music drifted across the water, trumpets and drums, something triumphant. Her voice carried clearly across the lake. "Attention, parade participants, stay in formation. The lake is ours for the afternoon." I nearly laughed. I stepped forward on the dock, letting the sun catch the new Trespassing $1,000 fine sign so every boat could see it. Then I raised my hand. The process server strode out, and just like that, the parade's rhythm cracked. People turned, cameras lifted, even the music seemed to falter. Bethany was mid-speech when she noticed him boarding a small dinghy borrowed from the marina. He motioned for Jake, who for the first time in years looked alive with purpose, to ferry him toward the decorated pontoon. The dinghy cut across the still water, leaving a thin V-shaped wake. Sunlight glinted off the briefcase. A hush fell over the marina crowd. Bethany saw the boat approaching. Her smile froze. Her hand lifted off the radio, hanging awkwardly mid-air. "What is this?" she shouted. "Who is that man? This is a private parade." Jake brought the dinghy alongside her pontoon with a gentle bump. The server stood, gripping the rail with steady hands. "Mrs. Bethany Reed?" She blinked. "Yes? What do you want?" He opened the briefcase. The moment felt cinematic, sound dropping away, the whole lake holding its breath. "Ma'am," he said loudly, clearly, "you are being served." He handed her 2 thick envelopes. One addressed to the HOA, one addressed to her personally. Her fingers curled around them reflexively. She tore open the first, and her confident smile evaporated. Her face turned pale, then ashen. She looked up at the crowd, then at me across the water. What is this?" she stammered. Her voice cracked. The process server spoke again, calmly. "Notice of trespass, demand for damages, and documentation of unauthorized use of property belonging to Cole Waterfront LLC." Gasps rippled across the boats. Someone dropped a drink. A kayak drifted off course. Bethany flicked through the multi-page invoice. Each line a detailed account of every parade, every club event, every unauthorized gathering she'd hosted on my dock. The total at the bottom glowed like molten metal. $104,173, due immediately upon receipt. She stumbled back, gripping the railing. This is impossible," she breathed. But the real humiliation came when she opened the envelope addressed to her personally. Her knees buckled slightly. She clutched the rail to steady herself. Her voice shrank to a whisper. "No. No, no, no." Sheriff Sarah took a single step forward, beside her SUV. Not threatening, just attentive, ready to intervene if chaos erupted. But there was no chaos. Just silence. The parade behind Bethany drifted out of formation, engines idling uncertainly. People craned their necks to see. Cameras recorded. The Lake Elite Club, once unified in smug superiority, now sat frozen in shock. And then Bethany whispered something no one expected. "Everyone, return to shore." Her voice trembled. Her parade, her pride, her power, disintegrated in less than a minute. Boats peeled away one by one, like leaves blown off a branch. Quiet motors hummed. Banners shook in the breeze. The storm had begun, and this time the HOA wasn't the one bringing it. The lake fell into an uneasy hush. Even the wind seemed to settle as if waiting to see what happened next. I stood on my dock, arms folded, watching Bethany's pontoon creep toward the marina with the grace of a wounded animal limping home. People on nearby boats whispered in tight clusters. The procession had been a spectacle of confidence minutes ago. Now it was a slow-motion retreat. Ripples formed small, trembling lines behind each retreating hull, breaking the once perfect turquoise surface into disturbed fragments. Bethany's pontoon reached the dock first. When she stepped onto the planks, her legs wobbled slightly, and she clutched the rail as though the world had decided to tilt beneath her feet. She kept glancing at the two envelopes in her hand, the legal weight of them making her fingers stiff. I watched her inhale sharply before straightening her spine, attempting to reclaim even a shred of authority. But the crowd gathering along the marina walkway wasn't offering her much comfort. Phones hovered at eye level. Whispered speculations drifted between clusters of neighbors. What was in those envelopes? She looked sick. Something about trespassing? Didn't she say they owned the lake? The rumors were already swelling like a tide. I walked steadily down the dock toward her, calm, almost quiet inside myself. The pounding heartbeat from earlier had eased into something colder, more focused. This wasn't anger. It was completion. She spotted me and stiffened. "You," she snapped, though her voice quivered at the edges. "You can't do this. You can't just make claims like—" "It's not a claim, Bethany," I replied softly. "It's a deed." A murmur rippled through the growing crowd. Her cheeks flushed blotchy red. Her eyes dropped to the stack of papers again before she stuffed them hastily into a tote bag, trying to hide the trembling of her hands. "You blindsided us," she hissed. "This isn't how community governance works. I was conducting a sanctioned event. On property you don't own. On docks you've used without permission. On land the HOA never filed a single lawful document for." I gestured toward the marina. "You've been trespassing for years." "That's absurd," she snapped. I oversee lake operations. Nothing in the CC&Rs says you do. Her breath hitched, barely audible but visible in the tightening lines around her mouth. Behind her, a board member, Harold, the treasurer, had gone ghost white. He tugged at her sleeve. "Bethany," he whispered, "the invoice. We can't pay that. The HOA reserves are nowhere close. And if this becomes a board liability—" "Not now," she muttered sharply, but the panic in her eyes betrayed her. I caught Harold's gaze. He looked away immediately. The process server, now back on shore, stood quietly a few feet behind me, briefcase in hand. Sheriff Sarah leaned against the rail of the community walkway, arms crossed, expression unreadable but attentive. She wasn't there to intervene, only to witness. Bethany tried one more time to salvage dignity. "You blindsided us," she repeated, softer this time, as if changing volume might change truth. "No one does this. Not neighbors. Not decent people." I exhaled slowly. "What you've been doing isn't decent, Bethany. You fined residents for imaginary rules. You ran a club that excluded most of the community, and you weaponized paperwork that was never legally valid." Her lips pressed tight. "You should have talked to the board," she insisted. "We could have resolved this amicably." "I tried," I said. "You ignored every letter, every call, every request. You declared exclusive rights to something the HOA never owned." Her jaw slackened. "So no," I added quietly. "This isn't blindsiding. This is accountability." Behind us, the last of the retreating pontoons docked. People spilled onto the boardwalk. Residents who had never once dared question Bethany Reed, now staring at her like they were seeing her for the first time. A soft voice broke the silence. A neighbor, Mrs. Kinley, who lived near the North Inlet, stepped forward nervously. "Bethany, is it true?" she asked. "Did the HOA ever own the marina?" Bethany opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She froze like a deer in headlights. The pause told the entire story. Another resident, Tom from Cedar Bend, cleared his throat. "If this is real, then the fines, the club dues, everything?" His voice trailed off, thick with disbelief. Bethany finally snapped back. "Everyone stop!" she barked, trying to reignite the authority that used to come so easily. "Do not jump to conclusions. The board will review this, and we will deal with Mr. Cole accordingly." A dry laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "I look forward to that," I said. "Because every document you need is filed with the county, and Sheriff Sarah has the enforcement authority if things escalate." Sarah lifted a hand in a small wave. Not a threat, merely acknowledgement. A ripple of unease moved through the crowd again. Then, like the final blow in a slow collapse, the process server spoke. "Ma'am," he said, addressing Bethany evenly, "please note that failure to comply with the notice or continued unauthorized use of the marina will be documented and may result in further legal action." Bethany swallowed, hard. Her fingers twisted the strap of her tote bag until the leather squeaked. Her sequined sweater glittered garishly in the sun. Too bright. Too loud. Utterly out of place against her unraveling composure. For a long moment, no one spoke. A single pontoon engine coughed weakly somewhere down the dock. Then Harold stepped forward, voice cracking like thin ice. "Bethany," he whispered, "what did you get us into?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. She simply turned, shoulders rigid, and walked briskly up the dock toward the parking lot, her once confident heels now clacking like hammers striking hollow wood. The board members followed, splintering into uneasy clusters. Residents dispersed slowly, murmurs trailing behind them like drifting smoke. Only the lake remained steady, turquoise, shimmering, reflecting everything. I stood on the dock long after the crowd dissolved. For the first time since this mess began, the lake felt honest. The parade was over. The performance was done. And tomorrow, the real reckoning would begin. The next morning, mist hung over Silver Ridge Lake like a low ceiling, muffling sound and softening the edges of the world. My boots crunched across damp gravel as I walked toward the community hall. A row of trucks and sedans lined the parking lot. Doors slamming. Voices hushed. The mix of fear and curiosity thick enough to feel. Today was the emergency HOA board meeting. Bethany had called it, but after yesterday's spectacle, she wasn't the one holding the cards anymore. When I walked through the glass doors, the room fell into a hushed ripple. Residents filled every plastic chair along the walls. Folding tables had been shoved aside. The overhead fluorescents buzzed like irritated hornets. The air smelled faintly of old carpet and tension. Bethany sat at the front table, flanked by board members Harold Jenkins and two others I rarely saw unless a lawn was half an inch too long. Her face was drawn tight, makeup a little heavier than usual, pink blazer crisp but noticeably wrinkled along the sleeves. Her tote bag, stuffed with the envelopes she'd been served, rested at her feet like a weight chained to her ankle. On her left sat the HOA attorney, Arthur Lyle, a nervous-looking man with too thin hair and round glasses constantly sliding down his nose. His briefcase bulged with documents he clearly hadn't slept enough to fully absorb. When I entered, he looked at me like he'd seen the ghost of litigation future. Bethany cleared her throat into the microphone. "This emergency meeting of the Silver Ridge Lakeside HOA is now called to order," she said. Her voice tried for commanding, but landed somewhere between brittle and breathless. "We are here to address, yesterday's misunderstanding." A wave of whispered muttering washed through the room. Harold flinched visibly. Arthur pushed his glasses up. "Mrs. Reed," he murmured, barely audible even through the mic, "I advise we avoid that word." Bethany ignored him. "First, I want to assure everyone that the HOA is in full control of lake operations and will handle this matter with—" I stepped forward. "No," I said. The room went silent instantly, like someone pressed pause on the world. Bethany's eyes sharpened, a flash of her old authority igniting. "Mr. Cole, you may only speak during the open comment portion." "Arthur," I said calmly, "would you please clarify whether the HOA owns the marina?" Arthur stiffened. Then he sighed, long, resigned, and opened his briefcase. He pulled out a stack of papers, tapped them into alignment, and cleared his throat into the mic with the soft dread of a man forced to admit the truth under oath. "After reviewing the property records," he began, "the marina parcel, including the dock lines and primary boat ramp, are legally recorded under an entity previously known as Silver Ridge Marina Company." A few gasps sparked in the crowd. Bethany's jaw clenched. Arthur continued, voice growing more so, timid with each passing sentence. "The HOA does not appear to possess any deed, lease, or exclusive use agreement regarding that parcel." Residents began murmuring outright now, no longer whispers, but actual shock. "So wait," someone said from the back. "All those events we had on the dock were unauthorized," Arthur confirmed. Another resident, a middle-aged man with a sunburned neck, stood up. "What about the Lake Elite Club dues? My wife and I paid $500 for a premium lake membership." Bethany's head jerked up sharply. "Those dues were for community enhancement projects," Harold's voice squeaked. They were deposited into the club fund." "And where is that money now?" the man pressed. Silence. Then Harold muttered something that made my stomach tighten. I don't know." A collective gasp broke across the room. The tension in the air became electric. Arthur adjusted his glasses again. Another issue, he said timidly, is that Mrs. Reed implemented the Lake Elite Club rules without a board vote or formal adoption process. Furthermore, the revised addendum has no record of being filed with the county. Someone shouted, "So it was fake?" Bethany slammed her palm on the table. "It was not fake. It was a draft, an internal draft." Arthur shook his head. "It was distributed as official policy. That's a serious problem." Marcus, leaning casually against the back wall, smirked just enough for me to notice. Sheriff Sarah stood beside him, arms gently crossed, not intervening, just watching. Her presence alone kept the board from spiraling into full chaos. Bethany tried again. "Look, everyone, these are minor discrepancies. None of them justify Mr. Cole's—" I stepped forward once more, placing a neat binder on the table. The thump echoed across the hall. "This," I said, "is every instance of unauthorized HOA activity on my property, documented by date, participant count, and event name. Lakeside parades, club socials, yacht nights, all without permission from the legal marina owner." The room buzzed with shock, necks craning to see the binder. "And this," I continued, sliding the served invoice forward, "is the calculated total cost of trespass damages. Over $1 million. Bethany's face drained of color. Arthur swallowed so loudly the mic picked it up. Residents stared at the board with a mixture of disbelief and betrayal. Finally, Harold rose from his chair, knees trembling like brittle twigs. "Bethany," he whispered into the mic, voice cracking, "we can't pay this. We can't even cover a quarter of it." Bethany shook her head frantically. "We'll fight it." Arthur turned slowly toward her. "In court? With no ownership documents? With fabricated rules? With unauthorized dues? Mrs. Reed, we would lose." A long, terrifying silence settled over the room. Then a woman near the front stood. "I move," she said shakily, "that we require the board to apologize to Mr. Cole, and that we negotiate a settlement." More murmurs. Others nodded. Then someone else added the words that finally cracked the last of Bethany's armor. "And I move that Mrs. Reed step down as HOA president." The hall erupted, not in shouting, but in loud, fervent agreement. People who had feared Bethany for years were suddenly emboldened by truth, by proof, by the realization that the emperor's crown had been cardboard all along. Bethany rose, trembling, her gaze sweeping the residents who once obeyed her. "You're making a mistake," she choked. "Without strong leadership—" "Strong leadership doesn't fake rules," someone snapped. "Or misuse dues," another added. "Or bully the entire lake," a third said. Her mouth opened twice, 3 times, but no sound emerged. A dethroned queen without her court. Finally, Harold turned to me. "Mr. Cole," he said quietly, "what will it take to make this right?" The room fell silent, every eye on me. I took in the faces, the hurt, the exhaustion, the hope that maybe this nightmare was ending. This wasn't just about me anymore. It hadn't been since the moment I saw that bogus fine. "It'll take transparency," I said softly, "and change." But the full answer could wait, because what I was about to propose would reshape Silver Ridge forever. The boardroom had gone quiet, so quiet you could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and the soft whir of the ceiling fan struggling to push thick air around. Residents leaned forward in their folding chairs. Harold swallowed. Even Sheriff Sarah straightened subtly against the far wall, sensing a shift. I reached into my binder and pulled out a smaller folder. Simple. Unassuming. Inside it was the future. "I'm not here to bankrupt the HOA," I said, meeting Harold's eyes first, then the others. "That doesn't help anyone. And I'm not here for revenge, even if it might have looked that way." A few people nodded. Others looked uncertain. I continued. "What I want is for the lake to belong to everyone again. Quiet gasps. A few shoulders loosened. I slid the folder toward the middle of the board table. This is a proposal for the creation of the Silver Ridge Community Lake Trust, a nonprofit entity that will manage the lake's access, upkeep, and fair use rules. No fake clubs, no exclusive tiers, no fabricated members-only privileges. Harold leaned forward, mouth dropping slightly. The trust would operate with a board elected by residents, I said. Open books, clear budgets, and every household would pay a small, reasonable lake use fee that goes directly into maintenance and improvements. Bethany's eyes narrowed. And who, she asked sharply, would own the lake? The question had teeth. One last attempt to catch me in something. I didn't flinch. Cole Waterfront LLC will retain ownership of the lakebed and marina, I said calmly. But it will lease operational control to the community trust at a symbolic amount. Someone in the crowd whispered, "He's giving the lake back." I shook my head gently. Not giving it back. Giving it to the people. Back implies the HOA had it before. They didn't. Another ripple of murmurs. Bethany opened her mouth again, but Harold raised a trembling hand, stopping her. "What about the settlement?" he asked. "The fines? The damages?" His voice shrank on the last word. "Negotiable," I said. "But they will show toward funding the trust, toward building something everyone can benefit from, not lining my pockets, not punishing the community, and not covering up mistakes." The room reacted like a slow sunrise, warmth spreading, relief awakening on the faces of people who had lived too long under Bethany's tightening grip. A woman from the second row stood. "Mr. Cole, Remy, thank you," she said, voice quivering. "We didn't know how to push back. We didn't know we could." I nodded. Most HOAs count on that. Arthur, the attorney, cleared his throat. "From a legal perspective," he said, adjusting his glasses, "this proposal is surprisingly reasonable and infinitely better than litigation. It resolves liability, protects the community, and frankly, saves the HOA from dissolution." Bethany bristled. "We don't need saving." Arthur didn't even look at her. "Yes, ma'am, we do." The room shifted, all attention lifting off her like fog burned off by the sun. Power was leaving her shoulders, evaporating, scattering like dandelion seeds caught in the wind. One resident spoke from the back. "I move we accept Mr. Cole's proposal." Another voice followed. "Second." Harold looked around the room, hesitant at first, but then he saw the faces that used to trust him blindly, now expecting him to correct the course he'd allowed to drift far offshore. "All in favor?" he said. Hands went up, nearly everyone in the room. "All opposed?" Slowly, shakily, alone, Bethany raised her hand. It hovered for a moment. Then even she seemed to realize the futility. Her hand fell. Harold exhaled. "Motion passes." A soft cheer lifted through the hall, not loud, not partying, but the sound of a community releasing a breath they didn't know they'd been holding. Bethany stood abruptly, gathering her tote bag and dignity like shattered glass. "I refuse to be part of this farce," she said, though her voice lacked the bite it once carried. "I resign." She walked out stiffly, chin high, but everyone could see the cracks. She passed Sarah without a word. Sarah didn't move, just watched her go with the calm patience of someone who'd seen storms come and go. When the doors shut behind Bethany, the entire hall felt lighter. Harold turned to me. "Mr. Cole, Remy, on behalf of the community, we are sorry." I didn't need the apology, but I accepted it with a nod. After the meeting, people approached me in small clusters, grateful, curious, asking how they could help. Some offered volunteer hours. Others wanted to donate. A few simply thanked me for standing up when they didn't know how. As the sun dipped behind the ridge, casting long golden beams across the parking lot, Sheriff Sarah walked beside me toward my truck. "You handled that well," she said. "Could have turned into a circus." "Just tried to stick to the law," I replied. She smirked. "Funny thing about the law. It works best when someone actually bothers to read it." That earned a laugh out of me. When I got home, I walked down to my dock. The lake was calm, quiet ripples catching the faint orange shimmer of the dusk sky. My pontoon bobbed gently, bumping against the weathered wood with soft, rhythmic taps. I stepped onto the deck and sat on the bench seat, letting the breeze brush across my face. Kids laughed somewhere across the water. A pair of kayakers glided by. A golden retriever barked happily from the distant shoreline. Life returning, the way it should have been. I thought back to the day I got that $5,000 fine. The paper that tried to bully me, to shrink me, to convince me the lake wasn't mine to enjoy. Funny how things turn. The lake hadn't shrunk. The truth hadn't changed. Only the people who Satan tried to rewrite them. I watched the sun sink behind the far ridge, painting the lake in molten gold. For the first time in months, I felt real peace settle in my chest. Steady, warm, earned. Silver Ridge Lake belonged to the people again. And justice? Justice belonged to everyone willing to fight for it. If you've ever stood your ground against an HOA, or wished you had, drop a simple yes in the comments. Stories like this remind us that fairness still matters, and sometimes all it takes is one person willing to push back. And if you enjoy tales of justice, grit, and folks reclaiming what's theirs, I'd love to have you stick around. Hit subscribe for more real American land and lake showdowns.